Hi friends, Andrew Carruthers here, Education Director for Zambia, and welcome to another episode of Artist Studio. Today we want to share something with you that we do in our hands-on classes pretty often, and this is more of a study of elevation. So we're not going to necessarily go through a specific haircut, but if you follow along, especially on another mannequin head, you're going to have a much better understanding by the end of how the different kinds of elevation that we use in layering patterns tends to affect our overall haircuts. So we're going to use Lydia here. This is the mannequin head that Pivot Point co-developed for us. You can get them at zambia.com. And on Lydia, we're going to break it into 3 different areas, and we're going to do 3 different elevations and see how do those 3 different elevations affect the distribution of weight top to bottom. So I'm going to get started, get her sectioned off. Let's start layering. So step 1 that you want to take care of is to part off the back portion of the mannequin head into 3 areas. Now there's a good reason that we didn't do this into the sides, and it's because the density and the hairline changes so dramatically that if we continue the layering into the sides, it's not going to give you a real clear comparison of the 3 different areas. So only do your sections until right here at the hairline where the density changes, but you want to have 3 fairly similar sized sections so that there's a really fair comparison. Let's go to our front right. And in the front right section, we're going to start with very high elevation. So we're going to just use kind of a static elevation, which we call 90 degrees vertical, which is your classic kind of square layer type of elevation, where you're taking the section and you're elevating it up straight vertical, straight up to the ceiling. And we're going to get the shortest point here on top. We're gonna grab the 6 1/4 inch Streamline Series shear. We're gonna cut everything fairly blunt, so we don't need a super long shear here, but I do tend to like a little bit of length on the shear, just so that way we get a nice clean cut all the way across the top of the section. So again, our elevation is gonna be straight up, vertical, straight towards the ceiling. We're gonna just take that entire section as a condensed section. We're not incredibly concerned with high precision at this point because we just wanna get more of a sense of what these 3 elevations do and how they distribute weight top to bottom. So we get that whole section. If you don't have big monkey hands like I do, it's fine for you to go through and subsection this into slightly smaller pieces, just so it's a little easier to handle. But I got big old paws, so I'm just gonna grab the whole thing. So we're going to take it fairly short so that we can definitely see the result, and we're just gonna cut blunt across that top with just a nice horizontal cutting line, not following the head shape, just very flat with the floor. Again, this is something very typical that we do as a hairdresser. So we tried to choose 3 things that we do commonly within hairdressing to make the comparison. So that's gonna be your first area, and that's gonna be that back right segment. The next one is going to be the center. So as you take out your clips, I almost forgot, make sure you clip off the hair that you just cut. You want to do that so that you don't pick some pieces up and include it into the next section. The next section, the center section, now we're going to do another very typical thing that we do, which is follow the natural head shape. We'll use the length that we cut at the top on the first section as our beginning length, but everything else is going to be disconnected, of course, because it's not going to match the elevation of the previously cut section. So we'll take the section clip out. We're using the dry sectioning clips that we have, and mainly just so that they don't create a big old crease in the hair. So this next section, again, we're going to work more 90 degrees to the head shape. And we'll take just a tiny little piece at the very top from that previous section. You can see that right there. We'll include that into the top of the next section. This might be a little unorthodox for you to start the layer from the top, but do not worry. Again, we're looking for the effect, not necessarily trying to perfect our technique right now. So you can see the elevation is at 90 degrees to the actual shape of the head, and our cutting line will also be 90 degrees to the shape of the head. So we're following that natural curvature of the head. Think about this just like the 90-degree state board haircut that you all probably have to do to pass your state board test. So just be cautious to continue to work very parallel to the head shape with the elevation and cut to that natural head shape. As you work lower and lower, if we start to cut down into the actual perimeter, no big deal. That's permissible. And again, mainly just because we're looking to have that nice comparison of what happens between the three different types of elevation. And we're pretty much connecting right to the perimeter. So good guess, Andrew. Nice work. We'll just check through that real quick, make sure we're nice and balanced top to bottom. That looks great to me, so we'll leave it. Take our clip and place it into that section one more time to hold it out of the way. Now the third section, this back left section, this one's a little funny. But it's something that, again, we do very often in layering hair. So the first one we did what we like to call 90 degrees vertical, which is kind of straight up towards the ceiling. On this third section, the final section, we are going to elevate to something that we call 90 degrees horizontal. And we do this a lot in the salon thinking, okay, we're layering the hair. We take all the hair, we hold it parallel with the floor, and we cut a straight line here. Technically, if you follow the Dao Sassoon kind of terminology, everything above here isn't necessarily even layered because it's below 90 degrees, and because of the finger angle here, it's cutting short to long at the top. This is kind of technicalities because in general, this is a way that we tend to layer hair within the salon. So that's why we include it in this process. And it's really going to help you to understand how your elevation affects your shape. On this third one, we don't want to use the top as the guide, mainly because it's going to end up extremely short in relationship to the rest of the hair. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to create our guide in the middle of the section because that's going to be the shortest point of this type of layering. Don't get too worried about the Y at the moment. Well, that works out really nice because it's basically the length of my comb. So comb length, we're gonna go right into the middle of the section here. We're gonna hold that parallel with the floor. We'll measure out to the end of the comb and we're going to just give ourselves a little. Now, I always like to go just a tiny bit longer than the actual guide, just because that way we can always cut back into the guide just slightly. From there, the elevation again is going to be what we call 90 degrees horizontal, which just basically means that the hair is being held parallel to the floor. There's my guide. I am gonna go just slightly shorter because I know that I left myself that buffer. Everything's being over-directed just to the center of the section. It's a fairly wide section, but again, we're not super worried about the over-direction factor with this particular practice. We're more looking to understand what elevation and even our finger angle does, because the finger angle is changing in each of these shapes as well. Last section, just be cautious to make sure that the over direction is consistent top to bottom so that it doesn't get all wonky and show you something completely different. And again, just comb through that, double check for consistency. Now, go ahead and set your shears down. And let's look at what we have here. So let's look at them piece by piece. The last section that we did, the one that's 90 degrees horizontal, you can really see that at the top of this section, you're actually entering into more of graduation. And the reason you can see that is you can see that little bit of weight line start to build at the top of your layers. Now, this is really good to see because it tells you two things. Number one, if this was on purpose, you wanted to build some weight towards the top of the layers where the top surface didn't get very very light, but you wanted to keep a little bit of heaviness at the top of the layers and collapse more in the middle, then this type of elevation is pretty key for that exact technique. The other reason we feel like this is something really good to notice is that very often in the salon, one of the questions that we get asked is, why do I struggle with getting weight at the top of my layers that I seem to have to texturize out of the haircut later? Most often, if we watch someone cut layers that are getting heavier at the top, it's usually due to the fact that as they get to the top portion of the haircut, they're holding that section at a low elevation versus either following the head shape or going up to a higher elevation. And that will cause that weight at the top of the layers. So whether it was on purpose or not on purpose, this shows you what happens when we do this. So let's go to section 2. We'll clip that out of the way just for now, just so we can look at each section piece by piece, then we'll comb them down next to each other as one final look. So in comparison, if you look at this section, you're going to notice that, yeah, you can kind of see where the layers stop at the top, but there's not a heaviness, there's not a weight line to this. So this was that section we did it all at 90 degrees to the head shape. And in fact, if you look at this top to bottom, and let's look at it even from kind of a profile view, you'll see that it has that roundness to it that mimics the head shape. So 90 degrees is the elevation, especially if we're following with our finger angle, because that adds to it as well. That's the elevation that's going to give us the most balanced layering pattern top to bottom and the most even distribution of weight. Let's go to the first one that we cut, which was the 90 degrees vertical. So as we comb that down, what we're going to notice is that you're probably not going to see a big start and finish point because these layers are very, very soft on the very top. That much elevation, because it has to travel so far back down to reach its natural fall, it softens itself quite a bit. So the higher the elevation, the more we're removing weight from the top, but also remember the higher the elevation, even if you're cutting blunt, because it has to fall further to reach its natural fall, it's also gonna soften the shape quite a bit. It's gonna soften the texture. So with this, we'll see that we have very, very short texture on top, but then the layers kind of drop off quick. We can see that the layers don't really exist too far down past about that point, and then it quickly builds into our perimeter. So at very high elevations, we take the weight away from the top surface, but leave the density towards the perimeter. At very low elevation, we're gonna see more density removed from the perimeter and building of weight towards the top of the section. And then if we follow the head shape with that 90 degrees, this one is going to keep us more balanced to the head shape and give us a more balanced distribution of weight top to bottom. So let's take all three out. And now, just especially if you've worked on this at home on your mannequin head, just kind of comb through each section by section, and notice how different that falls. It's very cool. So let's think about what types of hair these might be most beneficial to. If I'm working on a fine-haired guest in the salon, and think about where fine-haired guests want to keep the most density. It's at the perimeter, right? So if they want to keep the most density at the perimeter, and then the other opposite problem that our fine-haired guests have is that they tend not to get much body into their hair naturally. So think about which of those 3 types of elevation, high elevation, head-shaped elevation, or low elevation, which one is going to distribute weight best for a fine-haired guest that wants the most lightness at the top and leave more density in the perimeter? Good guess. It's that first one that we did, the higher elevation. Because as we can see, that gives us that lightness on the surface. So if they hit it with a round brush or a curling iron, a little bit of hairspray, they have the ability to add some fullness into the hair without sacrificing the density in the perimeter. So let's go with the opposite direction. Let's say we have someone that has very thick hair or hair that likes to expand a lot. If they don't want the hair to be as full, they don't want a ton of volume at the top, but they more complain that they kind of have that triangle head, right? Where it's kind of flat at top and then it comes out and it gets really full at the bottom. Which of these 3, the high elevation, low elevation, or following the head, do you think might benefit that type of guest most? We would tend to say more of the lower elevation. You could potentially do the 90 degree as well, because that's going to distribute the weight more evenly top to bottom. That might be good if you do still want a little bit of a shorter layer to the top so that they have a little bit of bounce through the top. But think about it this way, especially on a curly or coarse-haired guest, this top wants to kind of pick itself up on its own. So if we leave a little bit of weight to it, it'll distribute things more evenly, and then it takes more weight away from that perimeter and through the center of the overall shape. So it really affects that overall silhouette by collapsing in that area that's usually very wide. But it also leaves a little weight up here to resist the tendency of that type of hair to really kind of puff up and become a little too full. Now, of course, 90 degrees is a great elevation because it gives us a really great baseline to work from for a lot of different textures, a lot of different haircuts. Just gives us a nice even balance, and we can also combine these in different ways. Maybe it's starting 90 degrees, but then you leave your elevation a little bit more flat with the floor so that it doesn't tuck in as much at the bottom. There's lots of ways you can modify these. It's not even that these 3 things are the only things that we can do in layering, because we can really work between those different elevations in so many ways. Even in between the high elevation and the low elevation, this is a very viable place to cut hair. And we would challenge you to, again, work with a mannequin head and try multiple different positions, and also consider what does the finger angle do to the overall shape as well. So we hope that really helps to take away some of the mystery behind what elevation to choose to really give your guest what they need behind the chair. Thinking about this in advance and thinking about how it's going to affect the silhouette and the density of the hair is so key to your end results. If you have any questions, reach out to us. We always love to hear from you guys. And thanks so much for watching. I'm Andrew Carruthers, back here again for you on the Artist Studio.